The morning the tow warning appeared on my car began like any other Saturday. Calm, predictable, and pleasantly silent. Except for the aggressive orange sticker stuck across my windshield, flapping in the breeze as if celebrating its arrival. The bright, hostile paper felt completely out of place in the quiet cul-de-sac. It was the kind of paper that screamed accusation before a single word was even read. The message was clear. My car was allegedly violating HOA parking rules, and I had 24 hours before it would be forcibly removed. The claim was absurd. My car sat in the same spot it always had, neatly positioned along the curb directly in front of my property, well within the neighborhood's guidelines. I lived in a community where the HOA insisted on absolute order, and for years I'd followed their rules to the letter. I kept my driveway spotless, my bushes trimmed, my recycling sorted with almost religious precision. Anything to avoid the exhausting run-ins so many of my neighbors complained about. But standing there, staring at the warning, it was obvious something had changed. The HOA had crossed a line. It wasn't just the accusation. It was the tone. The notice included a claim that my car had been parked in a restricted fire access zone and blocking emergency pathways. Anyone familiar with the street knew that wasn't true. The curb had been painted gray for decades, never designated for fire access, never part of any emergency route. Nothing had changed, except maybe the people enforcing the rules. The HOA had recently elected a new chairperson, a woman named Marlene Riggs. She was known for her strict interpretations of the bylaws. Neighbors described her as someone who treated power like a personal hobby. She'd been in office less than 5 months and had already pushed new landscaping restrictions, fence height proposals, even an attempt to regulate the color temperatures of porch lights. People laughed at first, thinking the ideas would fade out. Instead, they multiplied. Still, even with her reputation, I doubted she herself ordered this warning. Surely someone else on the patrol team made a mistake. Surely it was a misunderstanding. That I peeled the paper off slowly, feeling irritation rise despite my attempt to stay rational. I scanned the fine print, noticing the timestamp. According to the form, the vehicle had been marked at 11:17 p.m. the previous night. I knew exactly where my car had been at that moment, parked exactly where it was now. That realization nudged at me, unsettling but persistent. If the patrol team had inspected the street at night, they would have seen the clear curb markings. They would have known the rules. They had no reason to target my car, unless they weren't the ones who made the call. For the rest of the morning, the notice sat on my kitchen counter like a slowly ticking clock, daring me to ignore it. Every hour I spent thinking about it made the warning feel more intentional, more pointed. It didn't help that the HOA office was closed on weekends, leaving residents with no one to contact. It was a clever design. If one wanted to pressure homeowners into complying before they had time to fight back, by early afternoon. After replaying every possible explanation in my mind, I finally decided to do the one thing I knew would give me answers. Review the neighborhood's community camera logs. Years ago, our street had collectively paid for 2 high-definition security cameras at each entrance to the cul-de-sac after a string of minor break-ins. They recorded everything: vehicle movement, shadows, anyone who happened to walk past. Footage was stored for 72 hours and accessible to any resident upon request, or immediately if you had the login credentials. As the volunteer web coordinator for our street, I settled into my office chair, the glow of the monitor reflecting off the still crumpled tow notice beside me. Pulling up the security system, I accessed the timeline for the previous night and scrolled to the timestamp listed on the warning. The footage loaded slowly, showing the view of the cul-de-sac from the front camera. The street looked peaceful, the familiar row of houses dim under the sodium glow of the streetlights. My car could be seen clearly, exactly where it always was, wheels straight, parked safely against the curb. Nothing that resembled a violation. At 11:16 p.m. No one was outside. The street was still. Then, at 11:17 p.m., the exact moment noted on the violation form, a figure appeared. Not a patrol officer, not even one of the nighttime security staff. Instead, a single person walked toward my car, holding something small and rectangular in hand. The person's steps were deliberate, unhurried, and entirely unannounced. As the figure came closer, the camera's infrared filter sharpened, revealing the unmistakable outline of a clipboard tucked under the arm. A clipboard. My heart kicked harder. Night Patrol didn't use clipboards. They used handheld scanners with barcodes on each street marker. Clipboards, fluorescent pens, and late-night inspections? Those belonged to one person in the community. And as the figure stepped closer into the camera's frame, the image became unmistakably clear that it was Chairperson Marlene Riggs. There she was, hair knotted in her habitual bun, posture rigid even in the still night. She approached my car, stood in front of it as if evaluating something invisible, then scribbled on the form attached to her clipboard. A moment later, she walked out of the frame just as quietly as she had appeared. I rewound the footage 4 times to make sure I wasn't letting anger distort what I saw. But the evidence remained undeniable. The HOA chairperson had personally issued the tow warning. Not the patrol. Not the staff. Not any legitimate authority. She had done it herself in the dark, without reason, without announcement, and without the support of the HOA's protocol. That wasn't enforcement. That was targeting. I leaned back in my chair, pulse thrumming, mind racing through the implications. If she had taken it upon herself to issue this warning, what else had she done? How many other residents had been fined, cited, or threatened based on her personal whims? How long had she been quietly bending the rules from behind her clipboard? The more I considered it, the more the tow warning felt like the tip of something much larger, something calculated and deeply petty. And if Marlene was willing to sneak around at night to enforce non-existent violations, what was she planning next? The footage was the first piece of evidence, the beginning of a trail. And with the timestamp, her appearance, and the logged violation form, everything was tying together far too cleanly to ignore. As I exported the video, saving a copy to my drive, I realized a sense of determination was settling in. The HOA had tried to push me into compliance through intimidation. But instead, they had handed me proof, clear, undeniable proof, of misconduct from their highest authority. The tow warning wasn't the real offense. The secrecy was. And now that I had evidence, I knew exactly what I had to do next. The moment I realized the chairperson had personally issued the tow warning, a mix of adrenaline and apprehension surged through me. The evidence was undeniable, but the question that burned brightest was simple. Why? Marlene Riggs was meticulous, obsessively organized, and notoriously self-righteous. She didn't make mistakes, at least not publicly. And yet here she was, caught on camera breaking the rules she demanded everyone else follow. I knew the first step was to gather more context. One video alone could be dismissed as a coincidence or misinterpretation, especially in the world of HOA bureaucracy, where perception was often manipulated by careful wording and internal politics. I needed to dig deeper, and I had just the tool. The neighborhood's comprehensive security system, which archived movement for the last 72 hours. I began reviewing footage from earlier in the week, focusing on patterns around my street. Almost immediately, something caught my eye. On the day before the tow warning, a vehicle belonging to Marlene herself had been parked unusually along the cul-de-sac. Not in the driveway, not in her own designated spot, but directly across from mine, partially blocking access to the curb. At first glance, it looked innocent, just another car in the neighborhood. But when I cross-referenced with the HOA's records, it became clear that Marlene had been warned multiple times about parking outside designated zones. The irony was sharp. The same person who issued a fine against me was blatantly violating the rules herself. I continued scanning footage late into the night. Hours blurred together as I traced Marlene's movements through the cul-de-sac, backyard to backyard, driveway to driveway. Every time I thought I had exhausted the tapes, something new appeared. A pattern of surveillance, observation, and quiet enforcement that pointed to one undeniable conclusion. The chairperson had been personally monitoring specific residents, and I was one of them. The next morning, I decided to compare the video with HOA correspondence. Pulling up the email archives, I discovered dozens of messages complaining about violations or proposing policy clarifications. Many were generic, mass-sent reminders about landscaping or paint colors, but some were peculiar. Anonymous complaints submitted without a clear author, timestamps aligning suspiciously with Marlene's appearances on the security footage. A quiet pattern emerged. complaints surfacing the very same day she had been seen near the cited property. With each cross-reference, the picture became sharper. The tow warning was not random. It was targeted. And with that realization came an uncomfortable but exciting thought. If I had evidence of one wrongful action, perhaps there were others. Patterns like this rarely existed in isolation. I knew I had to tread carefully. HOA politics were delicate. One misstep, one accusation without documented proof, and I risked being painted as the problem resident. But my evidence was already growing, and the logs didn't lie. The chairperson had acted outside her authority, and the receipts were stacking fast. To expand my investigation, I started quietly talking to neighbors, discreetly, without hinting at the video evidence. Most were hesitant to speak openly. HOA conflicts were notorious for escalating quickly. But after casual conversations and subtle questioning, a few admitted to receiving unusually harsh warnings or citations in recent months, sometimes for trivial matters like the color of garden lights or the height of hedges. Some had even experienced personal visits from Marlene late at night, clipboard in hand, much like the night my car had been cited. One neighbor, a retired teacher with years of experience navigating HOA regulations, mentioned something chilling. If the chairperson doesn't like you, even minor infractions can turn into major headaches. That was an understatement. What I was uncovering wasn't mere bureaucratic strictness. It was calculated intimidation, a quiet exertion of control by someone in power. Armed with this knowledge, I focused back on the surveillance footage. I noticed another detail that initially seemed minor but became crucial upon closer inspection. Every time Marlene approached my car or the properties of certain neighbors, she carried something in her hand. Sometimes a clipboard, sometimes a pen, and occasionally what appeared to be a small flashlight. But more importantly, she was always alone, working late at night, moving with deliberate, silent steps. She wasn't enforcing the rules as part of a team. She was acting as a personal judge, jury, and enforcer. The question of motive loomed over everything. Why single me out? Why pick a random Saturday to issue a tow warning when there was no violation? At first, I wondered if it was personal, a petty retaliation for a minor dispute in a previous HOA meeting. But then I noticed something even stranger. On multiple nights, the camera showed her lingering near properties with upcoming dues or potential violations that could generate fines. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but patterns emerged over hours of careful observation. She wasn't just enforcing the rules. She was micromanaging opportunities for control, for influence, for possibly financial leverage. By the third day of my investigation, I realized I had enough material to make a case. The footage, timestamps, and cross-referenced emails told a story too clear to ignore. The chairperson had abused her authority, directly interfering with residents under the guise of enforcement. I knew I had to act strategically. Going to the HOA board with only accusations would have been reckless. But going with evidence, timestamps, and supporting accounts from other neighbors, now that was a different story. To prepare, I started creating a detailed record. Each video clip was logged with time, date, and description. Every email or complaint aligned with her movements was archived and labeled. Notes on witness statements, patterns of harassment, and personal observations were all meticulously recorded. By the time I finished, I had compiled a dossier that not only proved the wrongful tow warning, but hinted at a larger pattern of overreach and misconduct. The final piece fell into place unexpectedly. Reviewing footage from 2 weeks prior, I noticed a small detail I had initially overlooked. The HOA patrol team had been called to a different location by Marlene's direction, leaving the street nearly empty. That created the perfect window for her personal inspection, allowing her to operate unchecked, without witnesses, in the dead of night. This wasn't an accident. It was a carefully orchestrated maneuver to assert authority without accountability. Sitting back in my chair, dossier complete, I realized the stakes were higher than I had imagined. The HOA's chairperson, the supposed arbiter of fairness, had been manipulating the system for her own agenda. The tow warning was just the opening move. And now, with proof in hand, the next steps would not just be about saving my car. They would be about exposing the misconduct and reclaiming control from someone who had been quietly bending the neighborhood to her will. I saved the final files to multiple drives, double-checked backups, and even prepared copies for secure off-site storage. The evidence was undeniable, organized, and ready. The only thing left to determine was how to present it, and how to weather the inevitable storm of backlash from someone who wielded power like a weapon. For the first time since the warning appeared on my windshield, I felt the surge of confidence that comes from knowing you have the truth on your side. Marlene Riggs had tried to intimidate me, but in doing so, she had revealed herself. And revelation, once captured, is hard to hide. The night was still dark outside, and the street remained quiet, but in my mind, a plan was forming. This wasn't going to be a subtle confrontation. This was going to be a meticulous, undeniable exposure, and once it unfolded, the HOA wouldn't be able to ignore it. The next move would require patience, strategy, and timing. One misstep could result in retaliation, escalation, or worse. But the most important thing was clear. The chairperson's overreach was no longer invisible. And soon, everyone in the neighborhood would see it too. The morning of the HOA meeting arrived with a quiet tension that seemed to hang over the entire cul-de-sac. I had spent days preparing, compiling the footage, emails, and notes into a cohesive presentation that left no room for doubt. Every timestamp, every image, every email lined up perfectly, building a chain of proof that documented not only the wrongful tow warning but the chairperson's broader pattern of abuse. I knew this meeting would be a turning point. Arriving early, I noticed the usual crowd of homeowners trickling in. Some greeted me politely, others avoided eye contact. Rumors about Marlene's behavior had begun to spread quietly. There was a buzz in the air, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Many had seen or heard whispers about her late-night visits, her sudden finds, and the way she micromanaged everything down to the smallest detail. But until today, most had no proof, only suspicion. The HOA boardroom, a small, fluorescent-lit space with folding chairs and a projector at the front, filled quickly. Marlene arrived last, as expected, clipboard tucked under her arm, face calm and measured. Her composure suggested she believed the meeting would proceed without disruption, that she still controlled the narrative. I, however, had a different plan. As the meeting began, routine items like landscaping proposals, minor repairs, and budget allocations were reviewed first, creating a sense of normalcy. Then came the agenda item that I had requested: review of recent enforcement actions and procedural compliance. It was carefully worded to sound administrative, neutral, and unavoidable. The moment had come. I connected my laptop to the projector and opened the first video clip. The room darkened slightly as the footage from 2 nights prior played across the screen. At 11:17 p.m., the camera captured Marlene walking down the street toward my car, clipboard in hand. The visuals were clear, the infrared capturing her movements in stark detail. I had labeled each clip with time, date, and description, creating a narrative that even the most skeptical viewer could follow. Murmurs began almost immediately as the neighbors recognized the familiar street and my vehicle. Some leaned forward in disbelief, others whispered, exchanging glances. The footage showed Marlene approaching my car, pausing, writing on the form, and walking away. Every movement was deliberate. Every step reinforced the conclusion that this was no routine enforcement, it was targeted action. Next, I displayed the cross-referenced emails and complaint logs. Each anonymous or oddly timed complaint aligned with the moments captured on camera. Patterns emerged: letters about minor infractions, late-night citations, sudden threats of fines, all originating from the same period when Marlene had been observed moving through the neighborhood. The evidence was overwhelming. I continued, showing clips of other residents' properties, subtly highlighting instances where Marlene had intervened personally, late at night, without any patrol or official authorization. The crowd's reactions shifted from mild curiosity to audible shock. Some leaned back in their chairs, shaking their heads, realizing the scope of what they were seeing. By the time I presented the last piece, the footage showing the street empty, patrol officers nowhere near the area, and the perfectly timed window Marlene had orchestrated to approach my car, the room was silent. Even the HOA board members, some of whom had been loyal to Marlene, couldn't deny the clarity of the evidence. Every timestamp, every clip, every cross-referenced document told the same story. The chairperson had abused her authority. Marlene remained composed outwardly, but I could sense the shift. The aura of control she always projected was cracking. Her calm smile faltered ever so slightly when she realized that the evidence didn't allow for excuses or reinterpretation. She had operated in secrecy, assuming that late-night enforcement would go unnoticed, and now, in the full light of a roomful of residents, she had been caught. Neighbors began speaking, quietly at first, then with growing confidence. They shared their own experiences of fines, warnings, and visits from Marlene that mirrored what the footage showed. One by one, the personal accounts aligned perfectly with the evidence on the screen. It became impossible to argue against a pattern supported by both visuals and lived experience. The final blow came when I displayed the parking violation that had started it all, the tow warning. Comparing the timestamp with the security footage left no ambiguity. The patrol was never involved. Marlene acted alone. Every attempt to redirect responsibility, every policy argument she might have had, was neutralized by the visual proof and corroborating documents. By the end of the presentation, the room was unanimous in recognition. Board members and residents alike understood the gravity of the misconduct. The chairperson, once the unquestioned authority, now faced undeniable accountability. The energy in the room shifted from tension to validation, the satisfaction of seeing truth laid bare. The consequences unfolded swiftly. The board, forced by the evidence, convened an emergency session to vote on immediate action. Marlene was temporarily removed from her position pending a full review. The community began discussions about revising enforcement protocols, ensuring no single individual could wield such unchecked power again. The focus shifted from intimidation to transparency. From secrecy to fairness, I walked out of the boardroom later that afternoon. My car still parked safely in front of my home. The orange warning sticker that had sparked weeks of tension was gone, replaced with a quiet affirmation that rules applied equally to everyone, including those at the top. Neighbors waved as they passed, their expressions a mixture of relief, pride, and gratitude. The street had changed subtly. More eyes open, more cautious trust, but also a renewed sense of community. In the following days, the story spread beyond our immediate cul-de-sac. Word of mouth, online neighborhood forums, and even local news outlets picked up the tale of the HOA chairperson caught red-handed, demonstrating the power of evidence, preparation, and vigilance. Discussions erupted about residents' rights, oversight, and the dangers of concentrated authority. Our small community had become an example, a cautionary tale of what happens when rules are enforced for personal control rather than collective fairness. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realized the key wasn't confrontation or aggression. It was meticulous documentation, careful observation, and a commitment to truth. The chairperson's overreach had seemed insurmountable at first, but step by step, evidence by evidence, the narrative shifted. The neighborhood didn't just survive the incident. It emerged stronger, more informed, and better prepared to prevent future abuse as the sun set over the cul-de-sac, casting long shadows across perfectly trimmed lawns. I stood by my car and allowed myself a quiet moment of satisfaction. The warning sticker, once a symbol of intimidation, was now a reminder that authority must always be accountable, that even those at the top are not above the rules. The HOA had learned its lesson, the chairperson had been exposed, and the residents had reclaimed the integrity of their community. The street was quiet again, but now the silence carried a new energy, a sense of vigilance, justice, and empowerment. What had begun as a petty tow warning had unraveled into a full-scale revelation, proving that meticulous observation and evidence-based action could overcome even the most entrenched authority. The cul-de-sac had survived its battle with secrecy and intimidation, and in doing so, it had rewritten the rules of engagement for everyone involved. No longer would residents live under the shadow of arbitrary enforcement. And for me, the lesson was clear. Vigilance, preparation, and patience could turn even the most targeted threat into a triumph of accountability. The ordeal was over, but the story lingered, a permanent reminder that in the world of HOAs, power unchecked is power abused, and that proof, patience, and persistence can bring even the most formidable opponents to justice.